A narrow corridor at court fills with hurried steps and quiet calculation, and a young duchess understands the problem before her: how to keep a vast southern inheritance from being swallowed by other people's plans. In late summer of 1137, Eleanor of Aquitaine stepped into power with more land than many kings, but with neighbors stronger than any one castle. The solution she pursued was clear and practical: use marriage and movement to make her frontiers into choices, not vulnerabilities. The core idea is simple. Eleanor treated alliances, territory, and public image as parts of the same toolkit, because in a world without fixed capitals, presence created authority. Therefore, she married for position, traveled for proof, and kept the map of loyalties shifting in ways that favored her house. First, the marriage that made her Queen of France. It joined Aquitaine's culture and income to a northern crown, but it also pulled her far from the lords she needed to keep close. Because authority in the 12th century traveled with the person, distance became a political cost, measured in weeks, not in ink. A necessary word in plain terms, a royal progress was a planned journey in which a ruler moved from place to place to be seen, dispense justice, collect dues, and renew loyalty. Apply that here, and you see the tension. When progress ran in the Île-de-France, Aquitaine felt far. When it ran in the south, northern councillors complained. Eleanor learned early that itinerary was agenda. Next came annulment and a decisive second match. By 1152, she married the next great contender in the region, a ruler whose lands stretched from Normandy to the Pyrenees. 2 years later, he wore an English crown, and her choice turned a marriage into a bridge across the Channel. This was not gossip, it was geometry. Aquitaine's vineyards, ports, and toll roads became the southern pillar of a realm that linked the Atlantic to the North Sea, which meant her travels were no longer courtesy. They were maintenance, keeping oaths alive where parchment could not reach. Consider how movement served strategy. When she appeared in Poitiers or Bordeaux, she confirmed charters, judged disputes, and rewarded service. When she crossed to England, she visited shrines, granted favors, and reminded officials that the realm had more than one center. Because roads and ships carried messages slowly, her arrival did what 1,000 letters could not. Distance gives scale to the method. On crusade, she traveled more than 3,000 kilometers across Mediterranean and Anatolian routes, an ordeal of months that proved endurance and rank in the same march. Later, as a mature ruler, she crossed the Alps to negotiate for a captive king, proof that age did not end her habit of turning miles into leverage. Alliance building wrapped itself around travel. At courts from Paris to Limoges to London, she placed allies in households, matched daughters to princes, and arranged guardianships that bent future maps without drawing a sword. If a border lord hesitated, a visit, public, ritualized, witnessed, could transform a wary neighbor into a partner bound by honor and gift. Land was never just acreage, it was a web of rights. Aquitaine's customs, tolls, and privileges differed from northern practice, and Eleanor's presence kept those differences a living promise. Therefore her image, dressed in regional finery, presiding over courts that used local forms, reassured southern elites that their law would not be erased. Image mattered because politics was performed. Patronage of poets and churches presented a ruler who cherished order and brilliance, a message that traveled through song and stone when riders could not. This was not ornament, it was messaging that made obedience feel like belonging. There was risk in the design. Marriages forged ties but also fused rival inheritances, which meant any quarrel inside the household doubled as a political crisis. If a husband or a son pushed against her influence, she had to reposition without shattering the arrangement that kept greater enemies at bay. She adapted. When sons came of age, she backed them with letters, introductions, and the weight of a lifetime's contacts. When a throne stood empty, she acted as regent with attention to revenue, grain, and garrisons. Because she knew the map, she could move resources before trouble found them. Daily practice reveals the machinery. A progress required staging posts, safe lodgings, and advance messengers to summon jurors and petitioners. A queen who traveled well trained the kingdom to meet her efficiently. In that rhythm, the act of moving stitched provinces together like repeated seams. Even setbacks became lessons in mobility. When circumstances confined her, correspondence multiplied, but she returned to the road when she could because authority stored on parchment fades unless renewed in person. The political memory of towns is tactile. They remember who arrived, who listened, and who left gifts behind. Names can blur, the pattern remains. First marriage aligned her with a northern crown. Second marriage rebuilt the chessboard with the Channel as a spine. Later, journeys sustained a far-flung coalition through decades of strain. At each step, alliance, land, and image were tuned together like strings that either harmonized or snapped. There is a boundary condition worth saying. Travel conferred power only if routes stayed open. If weather, war, or illness closed them, even the shrewdest plan stalled. In those moments she relied on proxies and kin, which shows that mobility works best as a system, not a single rider. A small scene shows the scale of effect. A delegation from a distant town waits at dawn beside a priory gate. The Queen arrives, hears a tax dispute, confirms a charter with a press of wax, and eats with the abbess. By nightfall, the town carries home a decision, a story, and a memory of presence, 3 forms of the same authority. Numbers anchor the reach of her household. She raised a generation of princes and princesses, whose marriages threaded Iberia, France, and the Empire. One son wore an English crown, another a Crusader's. Daughters carried her network into neighboring courts. The children were not pawns, they were roads. Gifts and building left marks too. Endowments stabilized monasteries that guarded roads and fords. Towns that received fairs gained markets that made loyalty profitable. Therefore, generosity was policy. Peace created revenue, revenue funded journeys, and journeys enforced peace. As decades passed, the same tools served new goals. She negotiated ransoms with the patience of a treasurer and the nerve of a rider who knew what winter roads demand. She arranged a marriage that placed a granddaughter on a throne where she could mediate future conflict, a long move that outlived her. Through it all, rumor swirled as rumor always does, but the record that matters is administrative and geographic. Charters bear her witness, itineraries trace her line from river to ridge, foreign envoys note her reception and rewards. Taken together, they show a ruler for whom the map was not backdrop but instrument. Finally, return to the corridor where we began. The problem was how to keep a southern inheritance whole in a field of larger crowns. The answer was to make movement itself a kind of sovereignty. By marrying across power centers and riding the routes between them, Eleanor made distance work for her instead of against her. The distilled takeaway is this: mobility is power. When alliances, land, and image travel together, a ruler can turn long roads into lasting influence. If you enjoyed this open case file and want more histories where the map becomes a strategy, like and subscribe for the next episode.